Okay, we'll begin now. Everybody, I think, is muted, and we'll start the class. I'm Jerry Garfinkel. I'm the treasurer of the Jewish Study Center, and as such, I'll give you the treasurer spiel. Our classes are right now all on Zoom and all free, but we do have expenses, and so we encourage people to donate. If you go to our website, www.jewishstudycenter.org, and you click on donate, you can then donate by PayPal or by credit card or by check. If you want to donate by check, if you check off check, it'll tell you where to send your check to. This class is being recorded. You won't, the people, your pictures won't show up on their actual recording, as far as I can tell. And there's also live captions, closed captions. So if you have hard of hearing, you can actually look at the captions. After the class is finished, I'm going to edit the recording. I need to cut off the part that started before the class actually began, and then I'll post the recording, and afterwards I'll send an email to everybody on where the recording is and maybe have some other information. Okay, now for today's class, I'm very happy to announce that this is a class about rewards and punishments in Pirkei Avot by Joe Rosenstein. And Joe is someone I've known for a short time, for about 60 years, 60 plus years. He was a year ahead of me in college and in graduate school. In college, I didn't really know him. I knew of him because he was a master chess player. In fact, he was the New York State champion in chess. And he played about 20 people at one time. And so he was well known around the college. And then in grad school, he was a year ahead of me, so I knew him. And he and I got PhDs, and he's a retired distinguished emeritus professor of mathematics at Rutgers University. He's done a lot of stuff in mathematics. Besides mathematics and chess, he is what I would call a religious student, scholar, and author. He's written 2 prayer books, one of which, Eitz Ratzon, we use for my daughter's bas mitzvah. And about, I don't know, 50 or 100 different congregations use the prayer book. And he also has written more recently a Machzah. Machzah is the prayer book he used for the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur services. And his prayer books are wonderful prayer books. Besides having the prayers themselves in Hebrew, they have an English translation, and comments on all of them. So it's a great book. They're both great books. But recently he's written another book about Pirkei Avot called Reflections on Pirkei Avot, not just what my Rebbe taught me. And I think it's a wonderful book. He talks about the various pieces or teachings, as they call it, in Pirkei Avot, which is ethics of the fathers. He tells about when each teaching was developed, why it was developed, what it means for our current time. He talks about the people who wrote these things, when they lived, what their life was about, and what these teachings mean to us right now. So it's really a wonderful book. So I think with that introduction, I'll let Joe come on and talk about whatever he wants to talk about. Oh, the class is not about his whole book, but only about that portion that involves rewards and punishments. There's a lot more teachings than that. Okay, so Joe, you can take it away now if you wish.
Very good. Okay. Thank you very much, Jerry. I didn't remember that you remembered about my chess playing. That was quite a feat of memory, because I haven't spoken to you about that for a very, very long time. In any case, good evening, everybody. Are there still people in the waiting room?
No, everybody is coming.
Okay.
There may be people coming in.
Okay. So my topic tonight, as Jerry mentioned, is rewards and punishment in Pirkei Avot. Some of you may be very familiar with Pirkei Avot, but on the other hand, some of you may not. So I'm going to, before I start addressing the topic, I'm going to say a few words about Pirkei Avot.
Well, let me introduce you. Let me interrupt you for a second, please, Joe. What I didn't tell people is when they have questions, and we encourage people to have questions and comments, write it into the chat and write it to everyone, because then someone else might comment on your question, etc. So write your questions in the chat to everyone. Sorry, Joe. Go on.
Okay. And there will be an opportunity after I make my remarks to ask questions directly, not just in the chat. Okay. So Avot is a small section of the Mishnah, which was compiled in about the year 200 of the Common Era by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, based on initial work done by Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir, and others in the previous generations. See, I'm now seeing myself only, but I'd like to see people as well, so I'm going to make it gallery here, so I can see you. Most of you are not visible, so if you can make yourself visible, I would appreciate it, because I would like to see my audience while I'm talking. So as I mentioned, Avot is a very small section of the Mishnah, perhaps between 1% and 2% of it. So it's a really small part of it. The focus of the Mishnah as a whole is halacha, regulations for the new version of Judaism that was assembled and created by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and his followers after the destruction of the temple in 70 of the Common Era. Avot is the only portion of the Mishnah that has no halacha, no rules, no regulations. Instead, it contains ethical teachings and advice to judges and would-be judges. Those topics we will not be discussing tonight. We will be discussing the other topics in Avot, which are advice to Torah scholars and would-be Torah scholars, and aphorisms which are addressed to the general population. The teachers in Avot, the teachers who are cited in Avot, span a period of 500 years, from about 300 before the Common Era to about 200 of the Common Era. There are 5 chapters in Avot, containing the teachings of almost 70 sages, presented approximately in chronological order. About 1,000 years ago, the practice began of studying one chapter of Avot on each Shabbat between Pesach and Shavuot. Since Shabbat always occurs exactly 6 times during that period, and Avot has only 5 chapters, a 6th chapter would add it to Avot, and perhaps when that happened, the resulting collection was first called Pirkei Avot. What is the appeal of Pirkei Avot? Why has this practice of studying Pirkei Avot proved to be enduring? Why has this part of the Mishnah captured the attention and loyalty of the Jewish people? So certainly the focus of most Jews has been on the ethical teachings of Pirkei Avot, and only to a lesser extent on the other teachings. From the issues discussed and the advice given in the ethical teachings, we learn that human nature has not changed all that much over the past 2,000 years. We still have to deal with such issues as anger, respect, gratitude, desire, humility, etc. And the advice given is, for the most part, very wise. The teachers of Pirkei Avot were, for the most part, wise men whose wisdom has endured for 2 millennia. What is also amazing is that these sages lived in terrible times. The Holy Temple and the Holy City of Jerusalem had been destroyed in the year 70 of the Common Era, and the Holocaust that took place 60 years later during the Bar Kokhba revolt was second only to the Holocaust of our times. Many of us are reminded of the Holocaust every day, though it happened over 75 years ago. They too must have wept every day over their destruction. Yet the post-traumatic stress that they must have experienced is absent from Pirkei Avot. Like the Mishnah as a whole, Pirkei Avot is upbeat and forward-looking, part of the conscious effort to build a new version of Judaism, to replace the one that was destroyed, to build a new version of Judaism that would last for thousands of years. I remember as a youngster studying Pirkei Avot on Shabbat afternoons in the spring with my Rebbe on his tiny porch. We went through Pirkei Avot one Mishnah after another, as it is commonly studied, and as it is commonly presented in commentaries on Pirkei Avot. So in an hour or two on a Shabbat afternoon, we could study all of the teachings in one chapter of Pirkei Avot. So the title of my book is Reflections on Pirkei Avot, not just what my Rebbe taught me. Jerry showed you what the book looked like, so I won't show you again, but I will later. In many ways, the book goes beyond presenting only a brief discussion of each individual Mishnah. So I hope that my presentation this week and next week will motivate you to visit my website, which I've and consider purchasing a copy of the book, and also enrolling in a 6-session Zoom course on Pirkei Avot that begins on January 26th and continues for 6 consecutive Thursday evenings. Or in a repeat of that course, which will take place actually between Pesach and Shavuot. So let us now begin with tonight's topic, rewards and punishments in Pirkei Avot. One of the fundamental issues in Judaism and in every religion is referred to as theodicy. That is, how can a good God allow righteous people to suffer and evildoers to thrive? In the Bible, one solution to this problem is presented in Psalm 92, the Psalm for Shabbat. So I'll ask Jerry to put up the first slide. Pause for a moment. Okay. In this psalm, I think we're going to make it 70%, Jerry, so they could see the whole thing. Okay, so in this psalm, the evildoers are compared to grass that appears to flourish, but will soon be blown away, whereas the righteous will flourish like a palm tree. Sadik katamar yifrach, ke'erez balvanon yisgeh. The righteous will flower like a date palms. They will grow mighty like cedars in Lebanon. Planted in the house of Adonai, they will flourish in the courtyards of our God. They will still bear fruit in old age, remaining vigorous and fresh, proclaiming that you are trustworthy, that you are my rock, and on that I can rely. So that solution to the problem of theodicy, that God is flawlessly fair and that all will be set right in this world, unfortunately, doesn't correspond to reality, as is recognized in Psalm 94 on the next slide. Psalm 94 calls on God to fulfill the divine commitment and complains bitterly about God's delay in delivering the appropriate punishments. Ad matai risha'im Adonai, ad matai risha'im yalozu. For how long will the wicked mock you? You are a God of vengeance, so take vengeance already. Rise up, judge of the earth, and repay them for their arrogance. If this solution doesn't seem to work, If you cannot believe that God will do what is needed to make everything right in the world, what are other possible solutions to the theodicy problem? One is to say that God is testing our faith, as God tested Abraham and Job. Another is to take a longer perspective and to say, well, all will be well with your family or with your tribe, even if things are not going well for you as an individual. Slide 3, another possibility is to say that we just can't answer the question, as Rabbi Yanai teaches in chapter 4 of Pirkei Avot. He says simply and directly, it is not in our hands to explain the reason for either the well-being of the wicked or the afflictions of the righteous. Very clear message. We just can't understand why things work the way they do, so don't bother trying to explain theodicy. Yet another approach is to say that we will focus our attention on doing the right thing without worrying too much about how it will play out. Antigonos states this last solution in the third Mishnah of Avot. Do not be like servants who serve the master in the expectation of receiving a reward, but be like servants who serve the master without the expectation of receiving a reward. So that's the plain meaning of the text. And as a teenager, I took it to heart. That is, in deciding whether or not to do a mitzvah, whether we interpret mitzvah to fulfill a commandment or to do a good deed, possible rewards from God have never been a consideration. Just keep doing what is right and don't worry about possible outcomes. The idea of Olam Haba as a solution to the problem of theodicy seems not to have occurred to our biblical ancestors. Let's go on to the next slide. In the Hallel, for example, in Psalm 115, we sing, Lo hametim yahalleluya, lo kol yordei duma. The dead cannot praise you, nor can those who go down to duma, silence. But we can and will praise you now and forever. Hallelujah. It is only in this life that we can express our gratitude to God. These verses are echoed by Isaiah in chapter 38. We cannot thank you in Sheol, praise you from death, or testify to your truth from the pit. Only the one who is alive, yes, alive, can praise you, as I do today. You'll notice in the Hebrew, the second line starts with Chai, Chai, alive, alive. Such a person can praise you. Okay, since we may assume that one of our prominent roles in any life after death would be to praise God, no praise of God after death implies that there is no life after death. So we can stop screen sharing for the moment. We'll return to the next slide in a little while. Okay. Isaiah mentions Sheol, and some people think that that is a form of afterlife. The word Sheol is mentioned 65 times in the Bible. I counted, not in the Bible, but I counted it in the concordance, and appears to be a euphemism for underground. In most cases, going down to Sheol simply means dying. In some cases, one is rescued from going down to Sheol, usually by God. For example, in Psalm 30, we read, Adonai, my God, I called to you and you healed me. You raised my soul from Sheol. You kept me alive so that I would not descend into the pit. No one ever comes back from Sheol, with maybe two exceptions. One is the song of praise attributed to Hannah after she gave birth to Samuel the prophet, which imagines that Adonai causes death and brings life, sends down to Sheol and brings up. That's the only mention where you sort of get brought up from Sheol. The other is in Hosea, chapter 13. He speaks of bringing the entire Jewish people back from Sheol. The other 63 verses make it clear that Sheol is not conceived of as some sort of life after death. Indeed, Isaiah 38, which we just saw, explicitly states the opposite. In the Bible, the people who die go to Sheol and are not heard from again. The one exception is that King Saul, fearful before a battle with the Philistines and terrified because God will not communicate with him, visits a woman in Endor who summons up the spirit of Saul's mentor, Samuel. She does so very reluctantly because Saul himself has banned all communication with the dead as idol worship. Sadly, Samuel does not give Saul any comfort, but confirms that he will lose the battle because he did not obey God's commands, as Samuel had already told him when he was still alive. Isn't that evidence that there is life after death in the Bible? Well, in the 19th century, there were many spiritualists or mediums in America who claimed they were able to mediate between our world and the world of spirits. They claimed that they could summon spirits and were able to convince people that they were encountering their loved ones. However, they were all debunked by the famous escape artist Harry Houdini, who was Jewish, who devoted much of his life to exposing the rackets of all those who seemed able to call up spirits very convincingly. So we can imagine Houdini attending a seance conducted by the woman of Endor and exposing her as well. Even the rabbis who translated the Bible into Greek 2,300 years ago, the writers of the Septuagint, referred to these mediums as frauds. So the idea that the dead will return to life does not appear in the Torah, or indeed in the whole Bible, except in the book of Daniel, which was likely written in the 2nd century before the Common Era at the end of the biblical period. In the centuries just before and just after the beginning of the Common Era, the idea of a life after death gained prominence, perhaps mainly to answer the question of why do good people suffer whereas evildoers flourish? If there is a life after death, then the answer to the question of theodicy is that all imbalances will be rectified in the next life. The good people will get their rewards, and the evil, their punishments, their just deserts. Another reason why life after death was an appealing solution in the first few centuries of the Common Era was the intense suffering by the people under Roman rule, including the destruction of the Temple in Jerusalem, and as I mentioned earlier, the Holocaust that took place during and after the Bar Kokhba revolt. When life was horrible, knowing that the righteous would be rewarded in another life must have provided at least some consolation to those who were suffering. In any case, life after death is first mentioned in Pirkei Avot in a Mishnah due to Hillel, who died in the year 10 of the Common Era, it is believed. Given what I said before about the theodicy problem, those who are righteous should be the ones who get into Olam Haba, the world to come. So let's now look at slide 5. So Jerry, you can resume sharing. Okay, here is what Hillel says. If one acquires a good name, he has acquired something for himself. But if one acquires for himself knowledge of Torah, he has acquired life in the world to come. Hillel is making two statements about Olam Haba, the world to come. If you have learned Torah, then you have acquired life in Olam Haba. And if you have only acquired a good name, that does not get you into Olam Haba. That is, being a righteous person is not sufficient to get you Olam Haba. So Hillel's understanding of Olam Haba does not address the theodicy problem. At this point, I have quoted 3 Mishnayot from Pirkei Avot. Antigonos, who says that one should do good deeds without being concerned about getting a reward. Rabbi Yanai, who says that we cannot understand why the righteous suffer and evildoers thrive. And Hillel, who says that only those who have learned Torah get to Olam Haba. Here is a surprise. All 3 of those views are rejected. Hillel's view is rejected 200 years later, not in Pirkei Avot, but in the Mishnah, which includes Avot. The Mishnah, as you recall, was finalized by Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. He was the great-grandson of Hillel's great-grandson. Hillel's great-grandson was called Shimon ben Gamliel. He was the head of the Sanhedrin when the Romans conquered Jerusalem, and he was beheaded by the Romans, together with a Kohen Gadol. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. The following Mishnah appears in Tractate Sanhedrin. It says simply, Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek b'olam haba. All Jews have a share in Olam Haba, the world to come. Olam Haba is not reserved for Torah scholars. It is available to all Jews. That is quite the opposite of what Hillel said 200 years earlier. This understanding of Olam Haba, unlike that of Hillel, does provide a solution to the problem of theodicy, or at least half a solution. This implies that the righteous will be rewarded, but doesn't imply that the evildoers will be punished. So now we can take away the screen sharing for another few minutes. After making the categorical statement that every Jew has a share in Olam Haba, the Mishnah in Sanhedrin backtracks a little and says that some people do not have a share in Olam Haba. For example, if someone doesn't believe in Olam Haba, it makes sense to say that that person should not have a share in Olam Haba. But the sages take it a step further and say that if someone doesn't accept that Olam Haba is in the Torah, then that person should not have a share in Olam Haba. Now that's puzzling because, as I have explained, the idea of life after death doesn't appear until the end of the biblical period. Why should the rabbis of the Mishnah insist that to qualify for Olam Haba, you must believe that Olam Haba is in the Torah? The problem is that in Deuteronomy, God says, do not add or subtract to what I have commanded you. Belief in Olam Haba would be an addition to what God has commanded, unless we can prove that it is in the Torah. So it was important for the sages to prove that the existence of Olam Haba is actually in the Torah. How did they do that? They used a number of verses to make their point. However, none of these verses is particularly convincing. We can see that by looking at just one. The most prominent verse cited in the Talmud is the initial words of the Song of the Sea, chanted by Moses in commemoration of the Israelites crossing the Sea of Reeds as a result of God's miraculous power. It starts out, and it's in the prayer book. We say it every day, those of us who pray every day, Az Yashir Moshe. Then Moses sang. The sages noted that the word Yashir appears to be in the future tense, so it should be translated, then Moses will sing this song. When will this happen? In the world to come. Therefore, the world to come is alluded to in the Torah. This proof, of course, overlooks the grammatical fact that in the Torah, future tense verbs are often used to refer to past events. So if you believe in the Torah, in the Olam Haba, but you don't believe that it's in the Torah, then you are saying that the rabbis of the Mishnah added something to God's instructions, and that therefore they are in violation of the Torah. Not good. For that, you are denied access to Olam Haba. Another interesting exclusion from Olam Haba is Bilam, the false prophet who was hired by Balak to curse the Israelites. his exclusion is a bit odd, because isn't Olam Haba reserved for Jews? In which case all Jews, including Bilam, would be automatically excluded. Not so. It turns out that righteous Gentiles can also have a share in Olam Haba. We are a bit more generous in that regard than most Christians who insist that all Jews will end up in hell. So those were interesting digressions, but the point was that Hillel's view of Olam Haba as being an exclusive club for Torah scholars was rejected. Now we go back to the share screen, slide number 7. Here is how Shimon Bar Yochai, a prominent student of Akiva, rebutted Hillel. Rabbi Shimon said, here I have Hillel again at the top here, Rabbi Shimon said, there are 3 crowns referred to in the Torah: the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of royalty. But the crown of a good name supersedes them all. Crown of a good name? That's something that Hillel mentions as being not enough for Olam Haba. But Shimon Bar Yochai has the chutzpah to contradict what Hillel says, and says, crown of a good name is above them all. The 3 crowns in this Mishnah refer metaphorically to 3 groups of people specifically mentioned in the Torah, who the Torah expects everyone to honor by virtue of their position. That is, teachers of Torah, the priestly clan, and the royal family. And commentators provide verses in the Torah that prove that those in these 3 groups have a special status and are deserving of honor. This perspective is reflected in the bracketed phrase referred to in the Torah in the translation of the Mishnah. That phrase referred to in the Torah is not in the Mishnah itself, but it's added there because that's how everyone interprets it. Okay, so we can stop sharing again for a moment. Why does the crown of a good name supersede the other 3 crowns? Well, if a king or priest or a teacher of Torah loses his good name, if their actions do not correspond to their status, or if their reputations diminish, they lose their honorable status. In that sense, an inherited crown is not as valuable as the crown of a good name. Thus, even though the Torah does not specifically mention a distinguished class of those with a good name, those who have the crown of a good name, Keter Shem Tov, are deserving of honor, even more so than the 3 crown groups that the Torah does mention. Moreover, the crown of a good name is something that every person can aspire to. This perspective is confirmed by the following teaching in Tractate Yoma. Quote, when a person is involved in the study of Torah, interacts well with the public, and conducts his business affairs honestly, what do people say of him? How pleasant are his ways? How appropriate his behavior? How fortunate is his life? How happy are the parents who raised him and the teachers who taught him Torah? And this is true sanctification of God's name and the Torah. How can we explain the crown of a good name in modern terms? Certainly it means that you have a good reputation, that those hearing your name would have only positive associations with your name. Certainly it means that your actions have the approval of others, that what you have accomplished and what you are trying to accomplish is regarded as praiseworthy. Certainly it means that you are a role model for others, that others want to emulate your practices and attitudes. To have a good name, you do not have to occupy an exalted position in life, but you have to do what is right on a consistent basis. When I went to Poland in 2012, I visited many cemeteries. In some of them, the inscriptions on the tombstones attempted to capture the qualities of the person buried there. On one tombstone, I found an unusual phrase. At least it was unusual to me. It said, Mukhtar b'ma'asim tovim, crowned with his good deeds. This was unusual in that the noun keter, which means crown, was converted to a passive verb, mukhtar. Unlike a ready-made crown that is placed, literally or metaphorically, on the head of a royal or a Kohen or a scholar, this man's crown grew organically as he performed one good deed after another. In this way, the crown of a good name is inherently different from the three customary crowns. Although Hillel regards acquiring knowledge of Torah as better than acquiring a good name, clearly Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, 150 years later, contradicts Hillel. Let us now turn our attention to Antigonus, who said that we shouldn't be concerned with rewards. We should serve God because that's the right thing to do. So on the next slide, there are 4 Mishnayot. They're a little bit smaller, so you may find it a little harder to read, but you'll be able to see it. And I'll read them, okay? So Mishnah 2:17, Rabbi Lazar ben Arach said, be diligent in the study of Torah. Know who you are working for and that your employer can be trusted to pay you the reward of your labor. Notice I underlined reward, that it's not underlined in the Hebrew, but just to make the point, I'm underlining it here. The next Mishnah says, Rabbi Tarfon said, the day is short, the work is plentiful, the labors are indolent, the reward is great, and the master of the house is demanding. The next Mishnah, Rabbi Tarfon also said, if you have studied much Torah, you shall be given much reward. Your employer can be trusted to pay you the reward of your labor. Know that the grant of reward unto the righteous is in the age to come. And finally, Mishnah 4:12, Rabbi Meir said, engage but little in business and busy yourself with the Torah. If you have labored at the study of Torah, God has much reward to give you. So there are a number of observations to be made about these 4 Mishnayot, 4 teachings. But first, let's look at who these 3 sages are. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach in Mishnah 2:17 at the top of this page was a student of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who escaped from Jerusalem shortly before it was destroyed and received permission from the Roman general Vespasian to found an academy at Yavna. It was there that he and his students created this new version of Judaism that has lasted for almost 2,000 years and that has enabled us as a people to last for 2,000 years. Elazar ben Arach thus lived at the end of the 1st century of the Common Era. Rabbi Tarfon was a younger contemporary of Elazar ben Arach, and his placement in Avot directly after Elazar ben Arach, he's Mishnah 2:18 and 19, whereas Rabbi Elazar ben Arach was 2:17. His placement there suggests that he may have been his student. Further evidence of that is that the phrase, know that your employer can be trusted to pay you the reward of your labor, occurs in both Elazar ben Arach's Mishnah at the top of the page and in Tarfon's Mishnah further down. Tarfon lived at the beginning of the 2nd century and was a contemporary of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Meir, who's responsible for the Mishnah at the bottom of the page, was one of the 2 principal students of Rabbi Akiva, together with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who we spoke about earlier. So they lived in the middle half of the 2nd century. So these 3 sages span about 80 years, yet their teachings are very consistent. They all speak of the importance of the study of Torah. That is a new development in Judaism, although Hillel spoke of it 100 years earlier. Before the destruction of the temple in the year 70, there were 3 sources of authority: the priests, the kings, and the leaders of the Sanhedrin, Supreme Court. 2 of those sources of authority, the priests and the kings, no longer existed after the destruction of the temple. A new source of authority emerged to fill the vacuum: those learned in Torah. The first person in Avot with a title of rabbi was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who lived in the middle of the 1st century. Their role was great because they were responsible for transitioning from a Judaism focused on the temple to a new Judaism from which the temple was missing. Moreover, they were persecuted by the Romans, So they had to create as many scholars as possible to ensure that at least some of them would survive. Many of their number, including Rabbi Akiva and perhaps Rabbi Tarfon also, were executed by the Romans for teaching Torah. So now let us look more closely at these four teachings. First, of course, they all speak of rewards, sachar in Hebrew. These are not the only Mishnayot that speak of rewards. There are, in fact, 16 additional Mishnayot that speak of rewards, some explicitly using the word sachar, and some implicitly. So already we know that Antigonos' teaching that we should pay no attention to rewards went by the wayside. Second, Elazar ben Arach and Rabbi Tarfon both speak of the study of Torah as malacha, work. And both Elazar ben Arach and Rabbi Meir use the term amel, labor. So the relationship that we have with God in these four Mishnayot is that God is Baal Malachtacha, which is mentioned in several of them, your employer. Now, this metaphor is problematic because the Torah tells us that an employer has to pay his workers on the same day. And we see in Mishnah 19, where Rabbi Tarfon says, payment will be made in the age to come. So this is problematic metaphor is avoided in another book called Avot de Rabbi Natan, which is a parallel book to Avot of uncertain origin. I can say more about it later, where we find the following language for the last teaching of Rabbi Elazar ben Arach that first mentions your employer. It says, know who you are working for, just as Rabbi Elazar ben Arach says in the Mishnah at the top of the page, and with whom you have made your covenant, mihu baal britacha, and that the one with whom you have made a covenant can be trusted to pay you the reward for your labor. Instead of focusing on God as one's employer, this version of the text focuses on God as one's covenantal partner. That perspective makes more sense in the other Mishnayot as well. When I saw this passage, I was struck not so much by this different focus, but by the fact that the notion of brit, covenant, the eternal covenant between God and the Jewish people, so very important in Deuteronomy, is completely absent in Pirkei Avot. How could it be that not one of the over 70 teachers in Avot thought to mention the covenant? The word brit does occur once, but it refers to circumcision, not to the covenant between God and the Jewish people. It could, of course, be a coincidence, but I doubt it. The covenant is not mentioned in the Kiddush for Shabbat, where you expect it to be found, nor is it prominent in the liturgy. An exception is the Musaf service on Rosh Hashanah, which includes a list of zichronot, remembrances, verses that speak of God remembering that covenant. But that list was likely compiled many centuries earlier. So here I just raised the following question. Had the rabbis of the Mishnah demoted the notion of covenant between God and Israel because with the destruction of the temple, they no longer believed that God's promises to Israel would be fulfilled in this world? And so they turned their attention to the world to come. Question. Two more quick digressions about this page. First, in Mishnah 219, in the middle, there's three dots there, an ellipsis, which indicates that something that has been omitted. What has been omitted there, not because it's not important, but because it's not relevant to our discussion, is the teaching of Rabbi Tarfon, which says, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, lo ata ben chorin lebatel mimena. It is not your responsibility to complete the work, but you are not allowed to abandon it. This teaching has become very popular. It is often sung and sometimes quoted in a political context. For example, by the governor-elect of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, in his acceptance speech just a month ago. The word malacha in context means study of Torah. But when the first part of the Mishnah is used out of context, as I just described, the word malacha can refer to any task that seems huge, like reducing poverty, slowing global warming, or running a state. When I wondered whether I would be able to finish my book on Pirkei Avot, I was then almost 80 years old, and thousands of people my age were dying of COVID. Rabbi Tarfon told me to keep working on my book, not to worry about finishing it. Second digression, Rabbi Meir uses the Hebrew term for business, asek, and suggests that you should minimize your business because your real business should be studying Torah. It is probably because of this teaching by Rabbi Meir that the bracha that we say before studying Torah ends, Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. You have sanctified us with your commandments and have commanded us to asok, in the words of the Torah. Returning now to our topic, here's a third observation about these four Mishnayot. Two of the teachings mention Sachar Gadol, Sachar Harbe, great reward. What that great reward consists of is not mentioned. Surprisingly, none of these Mishnayot says that the reward is Olam Haba. You would expect them to say that because that's what Hillel said. Rabbi Tarfon mentions that the reward is Le'atid Lavo, the time to come. Perhaps that is a synonym for Olam Haba, or perhaps Olam Haba had not yet become standard terminology by the year 150. On the other hand, Le'atid Lavo cannot be simply Olam Haba, the world to come, because as we saw, Kol Yisrael Yeshnam Chelek Olam Haba. Every Jew has a portion of the world to come, not just Torah scholars. So this is a puzzle. Perhaps the idea that every Jew has a portion of the world to come had not yet been formulated in the time of Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, Rabbi Tarfon, and Rabbi Meir. Perhaps the idea that rewards come for other mitzvot as well as studying Torah had not been an issue for them. Indeed, the two ideas that all Jews have a place in Olam Haba and that reward comes for all mitzvot are both formulated closer to the time that the Mishnah was completed, the year 200. Let's look at slide 9, which is a teaching of Rabbi Yehuda himself. As I mentioned before, he is the person responsible for putting the entire Mishnah together. He is the Nasi, the head of the Sanhedrin, and also the leading scholar of his generation. He is the leader of the community. He is a direct descendant of Hillel. He says in this Mishnah, be careful with a light commandment as with a serious one, for you do not know the reward for the fulfillment of the commandments. From this simple statement, we see that rewards are now attached to all commandments, not just to the study of Torah. We also learn that we do not know what the rewards are for fulfilling the different commandments. We also learn that there may be different rewards for fulfilling different commandments. Finally, we learned that the reward for learning Torah, which we might have thought was the most serious commandment, may not be as great as the reward for what seems to be a simple commandment, like reciting the Shema. Of course, we do not know exactly what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi meant by light and serious commandments. So far, we have discussed two strands of rewards, the Olam Haba strand and the study of Torah strand. This teaching by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi serves as an introduction to a third strand of rewards, the Din v'Cheshbon strand, that is characterized by judgment, that's Din, and accounting, Cheshbon. The idea that we are all judged by God and that our deeds, good and bad, are taken into account, as in an accounting. Let's go on to the next slide. This is how Elazar HaKapar, a contemporary of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, presents it. He says, know that all is according to the calculation. Be prepared for a trial and an accounting before the King of the Kings of Kings the Holy One, the Blessed God. The next part at the bottom of that page is part of the same Mishnah that I quoted a moment ago of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Since he essentially compiled the Mishnah, this teaching is perhaps a summary of the thinking of the rabbis of the Mishnah. Here he says, focus on three things and you will not come into the clutches of sin. Know what is above you. There is an eye that sees and an ear that hears, and all your deeds are written in a book. The book in which all of our deeds are written is first mentioned in a verse by Malachi, one of the last prophets in the Bible. And it finds its way into the Yonatan Tokev prayer that occupies a central role in the liturgy for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. In that prayer, we note, referring to God, that you bring to mind all that is forgotten, for you open the book in which all is recorded, and it tells you all that has happened, for the book is written in each person's own hand. One moment. So I learned something new about that book from Pirkei Avot. So let's go on to the next slide. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov said, one who fulfills a single commandment acquires a single defender. One who performs a single transgression acquires a single prosecutor. In a class that I taught last year, someone asked me where these prosecutors and defenders live. I realized at that moment that my understanding of the book of our lives described in the liturgy was much too limited. I thought of it like all the books that we read with paragraphs and pages. Now I realize that all those beings, the prosecutors and defenders, live in that book. So henceforth, I will understand the book and the liturgy as a pop-up book, where the prosecutors and defenders live, each ready to tell its tale when God reaches its page. For example, look, God, at this video where this person belittled an employee before all of his coworkers. Or look, God, at this video where this person allowed a senior citizen burdened with packages to go ahead of her in line at the post office. Go on to the next slide. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi also says, the top here is the same as in the previous slide. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi also tells us in that Mishnah that God is omniscient, that God is, as it were, an eye that sees and an ear that hears. This echoes the teaching of Rabbi Akiva that says, Hakol Safui, everything is seen. Now, most translations of this Mishnah says everything is foreseen, which I think is incorrect. And indeed, in modern Hebrew, Safui means foreseen, although in biblical Hebrew, Safui means seen. Please ask me afterwards about why I think that translation, foreseen, is incorrect. In this Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva also refers to judgment when he says, the world is judged with goodness, that is compassion, and also that everything is according to the preponderance of one's works. So a judgment is taking place. In his commentary on Avot, Maimonides gives a telling example of what does it mean, preponderance of one's work. He notes that one gift of 1,000 dinar, that was a coin that Maimonides was familiar with, a currency that Maimonides was familiar with. He says, although one gift of 1,000 dinar, although it's very consequential to the recipient, is less consequential for the donor than 1,000 gifts of 1 dinar, since the regular exercise of giving has a positive impact on one's character. By giving regularly, you develop the trait of generosity. So we have now seen 3 strands of rewards. the Olam Haba strand, the study of Torah strand, and the judgment of accounting strand. How do these three strands fit together? Not much is said about that in Pirkei Avot. But here are a few questions that we would like to ask. You probably have more. One, what is Olam Haba like, according to Hillel, according to the later sages? Two, do some people have more of a chelik, more of a portion than other people? Three, does this transition to Olam Haba happen immediately after we die, or do we have to wait until we all die? Four, how can a trial take place if we're dead and cannot testify in our defense? Five, do Torah scholars get special rewards beyond their place in Olam Haba? So you'll have to come back next Thursday to find out some answers to these questions. Of course, the answers won't be definitive, nor will they probably be satisfactory. But they will, I think, be interesting. And then we will get to the question of punishments in Pirkei Avot. So please come next week, and please visit my website, which is simply joerosenstein.com, and buy a copy of my book. Let me close with a brief show and tell. If you visit my website, you will also see the Siddur that I wrote, which Jerry held up before. So this is a Siddur for Shabbat. I also have a Siddur, which is a weekday Siddur, which comes in two variants, large and small. The small one is primarily for commuters and travelers, but the large one can be seen by people. I also have as Jerry mentioned, I also wrote a machzor. So let me show you that. That looks like this. It's green rather than red. Actually quite thick, 1,000 pages almost. And finally, in addition to the new book that I've written, I have a small book called Memorable Verses in the Torah, which looks like this. So all of those are interesting books. I hope you'll visit my website, take a look at them. All of them would make marvelous Hanukkah presents. So thank you very much for coming to this session. And I'll now be happy to hear your comments and to try to respond to any questions that you have. So I see. So I think what we'll do is we'll go in order of the hands, the mechanical hands. So if you go to where is it? Reactions at the bottom of the screen, and tap on raising your hand will be raised. So I see that Jenny has her hand up that way. So I'll call on you first.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I just wanted to clarify about the three strands. That one is the world to come, one is a good name, one is the study of Torah. In the end, is that saying that they each are they're each a different reward, that a good name is reward in itself, the study of Torah is a reward in itself, or both of those are rewarded in the world to come? I wasn't sure if there are three different rewards or they all lead to the reward is in the world to come.
See, the answer is that it's not clear.
Okay.
On the one hand, we have the statement that says that every Jew has a portion in the world to come. So that should mean that, literally everyone has a portion in the world to come, except for a few, with a few exceptions, everyone has a portion in the world to come. So that means that both the Torah scholars and the non-Torah scholars have a place in the world to come. Both those who do a lot of mitzvot and those who do few mitzvot. And now then we have over here another thing about din v'cheshbon. There's going to be a reckoning. What are the consequences of that reckoning? It's not said. If you pass the reckoning, does that automatically get you into Olam Haba? And if you don't pass the reckoning, does that automatically exclude you from Olam Haba? Well, it shouldn't, because every Jew has a place in the Olam Haba. So there's no clear answer to those questions, at least in Pirkei Avot. Now, later times people try to sort these things out, but there are different strands here. There's one, as I say, there's one strand which values particularly the study of Torah. Another strand which involves God making some sort of judgment, and then the final strand which says that everyone gets into Olam Haba. So, what's the answer? Very hard to figure out. They do attempt to figure it out, and I'll say more about that next time. But ultimately, they don't. It's not decided. So, for example, the question, the phrase "Gan Eden," the Garden of Eden. That's a very common phrase that's used in discussions about Olam Haba. It doesn't appear in Pirkei Avot. It does appear once, but not in the context of reward. The question of Mashiach is also somehow connected to all of these things. That phrase doesn't appear anywhere in Olam Haba either. So it's very hard to answer how these fit together. It's just, so that's why I sort of presented this as having three separated strands, each of which deals with the question of rewards, but I can't say how they fit together ultimately. It's not there.
Okay, thank you.
That's disappointing in a way, because you would like it all to come together. But the nature of the book is that it wasn't it doesn't come to any conclusions, because it has, as I said, 70 or so teachers over a period of 500 years. They never sat down together to talk. When it was put together by Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, or maybe earlier by Rabbi Meir, they had to, from memory, figure out what some of the early people said, and how they selected which of their sayings to be included in Pirkei Avot is not clear. They certainly didn't try to come to any conclusions, or very only to some small extent do they have conclusions. So it's not a book which has a beginning and an end. It's sort of a bunch of statements, and trying to extract from that what they really meant is a challenge.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? I saw some other hands up before, but okay. Is there anything in the chat?
All I see is the reference that Eric Lander, the White House
Yes.
science advisor, used Pirkei Avot when he was sworn in to the cabinet.
Yes.
Mark Garland has a hand raised.
I'm sorry. So let me just say 1 second. Let me mention about that. Yes, and I see the next. I actually included that person's reference in the next version of my book, or maybe in this version of my book. And as the next person pointed out, that his White House career did not end happily, and that's also correct. Okay. And the last comment was, I didn't see what the person said. Okay, very good. Okay, so Mark, yes, please.
So it was just the last Mishnah portion where free will was mentioned.
Yes.
So I mean, what do you think about just the presence of evil being a consequence of free will?
So yes, that's I can't say it's unavoidable, but it seems to be in practice unavoidable that people do evil things, because we believe in free will, and that's how that's certainly one consequence. So that's something that Akiva mentions, Rabbi Akiva mentions very prominently in that Mishnah, although I didn't mention it there, and that's prominently mentioned in the book of Deuteronomy. God says, "I set before you good and evil, life and death, and so choose life. And so that's a very important part of Judaism. And Rabbi Akiva mentions it there, but he says God sees everything. So let me, since not too many questions, let me expand on that a bit. Maimonides translates the first phrase of Rabbi Akiva's statement, "Hakol Safui," as everything is foreseen, not as everything is seen. What does that mean? That means that not only is God omniscient, that God sees everything that happens, an eye, as Rabbi Yudah Nasi says, an eye that sees and an ear that hears, but that God knows what's going to happen in the future. So that's something beyond omniscience. So I call that super omniscience. So where does Maimonides get that from? So in Islam, most parts of Islam do not believe in free will. They believe in predetermination. That is to say, that everything is decided beforehand. Maimonides lived all his life under Islamic rulers and conversed with Islamic philosophers and theologians. So he had to reject the notion of predetermination because it's very explicit in the Torah that we have free will. One aspect of predetermination is God's super omniscience, that God knows everything that's going to happen, because if God is making it happen, then God knows everything that's going to happen. God's super omniscience does not appear in Judaism. But Maimonides somehow, even though he rejected the predetermination part of Islam, he sort of was attracted to the idea that God foresaw everything. And he gets himself wrapped up, I think, into knots, philosophical knots, by stating that. But that's what he does. And so his translation of Hakol Safui was basically everything is foreseen. So I didn't like that, and I changed it to seen. But I wondered whether anyone before him had translated as foreseen. And so eventually I said, hey, I should look at Rashi to see what Rashi says. Rashi lived in the century before Maimonides. And I looked up what Rashi says about Hakol Safui, everything is seen or foreseen. And he says very clearly, he says, this means that God sees everything that takes place in rooms within rooms, but makes no mention whatsoever of God foreseeing anything. So, so Maimonides really invented this notion. He tried, one of his goals was to incorporate the wisdom of the sages with the wisdom of Aristotle, and Aristotle's ethics in particular. But he apparently also tried to incorporate what he saw as the good parts of Islam in the picture, but I think it didn't work. So I sort of went away from your question. I don't know whether I answered your question, Mark, but if not, you can come back with another comment. No, you're okay. Okay. Other questions? Any objections? No objection. Surely something I said must have raised some objections in your mind.
Well, maybe people will watch the recording and figure out some things you may have done wrong.
Okay.
So I guess it's time. It's 8:16. It's supposed to end at 8:15. Well, and now, again, I'll mention again, after the recording has been posted, I will send an email out to everyone who's registered. For some reason, only about a third of the people who registered actually came to attend the class, but they'll all get the email about the recording. So we'll see what happens. Maybe more people come next time. Thank you, Joe. As I've said about 10,000 times, I really very much like the book. And I think if people get the book, they will really enjoy at least large parts of it. I certainly did. So we'll see hopefully we'll see everyone back a week from now to the second session.
Okay. So thank you all for coming and good night.
Okay. Good night.
Yeah. Good night.